I had just turned 17 when I found out exactly what I meant to my father. Not in some quiet, gradual way where you slowly piece things together over years. In one phone call, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, lying on a gymnasium floor with my collarbone broken in 2 places and my vision going in and out like a bad signal. That's when I found out. My name is Ren. I'm 29 now, and I still flinch a little every time I hear a basketball bounce on hardwood. Growing up, I was what people in my family called the easy one. My older brother Callum was the dramatic one, loud, funny, always in some kind of trouble that my father found charming. My younger sister Blythe was the baby, the one who could cry her way out of anything and make everyone feel guilty for even being upset with her. And then there was me, Ren. The one who just handled things. My parents divorced when I was 11. It wasn't a screaming, throwing things divorce. It was quieter and somehow worse. The kind where 2 people just stop looking at each other and start going through the motions until one day, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and said my father was going to be living somewhere else for a while. That while turned into forever. My father moved 40 minutes away, which sounds close enough. And for the first year it was. Every other weekend, Wednesday dinners, birthday calls that came on the actual day. He tried. I'll give him that. He tried for about 14 months. Then he met Diane. Diane wasn't a bad person. I want to be clear about that. She was perfectly pleasant in the way that a waiting room is pleasant. Neutral colors, nothing offensive, nothing that really stays with you. But she had 2 sons from her first marriage, and those boys were 10 and 12, and they needed a lot of attention. And my father had always been the kind of man who needed to feel needed. So gradually, then all at once, we became the every other weekend kids, then the once-a-month kids. Then the kids he called on Christmas and birthdays and forgot about the rest of the time. Callum handled it by getting angry. He stopped picking up my father's calls by the time he was 16, and by 18, he'd made peace with it in his own hard way. Blythe cried to our mother about it, and our mother held her and said the right things, and Blythe seemed to process it and move on with the resilience that only the truly beloved seem to possess. I handled it by being fine. That was my job. I was fine. I threw myself into volleyball. I was good at it, genuinely good, not just trying hard good. By junior year, I was a starting outside hitter, and we'd made regionals 2 years running. Volleyball was the one place where being intense and focused was an asset instead of a personality flaw. My coach, Mr. Hendricks, used to say I played like I had something to prove. He wasn't wrong. I just never told him what it was. My father came to 2 of my games in 3 years. He always had a reason for the others. Diane's sons had something. There was a work thing. The drive was long. I always said it was fine. I'd gotten very good at saying that. The October tournament was the biggest of my high school career. We were playing for a regional qualifier spot. My mother had taken the day off work. My grandmother had taken the day off work. My grandmother had driven 2 hours. Half my class was in the bleachers. My father had said he would come. He actually said those words. I'll be there, Ren. I wouldn't miss it. I remember I didn't let myself feel too much about it. I trained myself not to, by then. But somewhere underneath the careful, neutral feeling I maintained, there was something small and stubborn that believed him. 3rd set. We were up by 4 points. I went up for a kill shot I'd made 100 times in practice. And the girl on the other side of the net, she was just doing her job. She timed her block perfectly, and we collided midair. I came down wrong. I knew immediately that something was seriously wrong by the sound before I even registered the pain. I heard it before I felt it. The pain came about 2 seconds later, and it was the kind that turns your vision white at the edges. I was conscious the whole time. That was somehow the worst part. Being completely aware of everything happening around me while my body felt like it was shorting out. The athletic trainer came out. Coach Hendricks was crouching next to me saying my name. I could hear my mother's voice from somewhere in the bleachers, that specific pitch that mothers hit when they're scared but trying not to show it. The ambulance came. I remember thinking that was probably overkill, and then thinking, no, this actually really hurts. Maybe it's not overkill. In the ambulance, I asked the paramedic if someone had called my dad. She checked her notes and said yes. The school had called both emergency contacts. My mother was already following in her car. My father did not come. He didn't come to the emergency room. He didn't come when the doctor explained that the break was clean, but I'd also torn ligaments in my shoulder and needed surgery to prevent long-term damage. He didn't come when my mother signed the consent forms with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. He didn't come during the 4 hours I was in surgery or the 3 hours after when I was in recovery. He called at 9:47 that night. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock. My mother had fallen asleep in the chair next to my bed, finally, after I'd told her about 6 times that I was okay and she should rest. I was watching the clock because the pain medication made sleep impossible, and I was trying to count down to when I could ask for more. His name lit up my phone and I answered it. The first thing he said was, "Hey, I heard you had a rough day." I heard you had a rough day? I had broken bones and torn ligaments, and I'd been in surgery, and I was alone in a hospital room at 9:47 at night, watching a clock, and my father said he heard I had a rough day. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was genuinely trying to figure out what to say. He filled the silence. He explained that he'd been at Diane's younger son's school thing, some kind of award ceremony, and he hadn't been able to get away, and by the time it was over, the surgery was already happening, so there wasn't really a point in driving all the way there. And he'd been meaning to call sooner, but the evening got away from him. The evening got away from him, I said. Okay. He said, "You'll be back on the court in no time. You're tough." I said, "Okay." He said he'd try to come by the hospital tomorrow if he could work it out. He did not come the next day. My mother didn't say a word about him the entire time I was in the hospital. Not one word. She brought my favorite chapstick from home and a blanket from my bed, and she sat with me and watched terrible daytime television and didn't say a single thing about my father. I knew she was giving me a gift. I couldn't even tell her I noticed. What I didn't know was that someone had noticed something else entirely. My maternal grandmother, my mother's mother, Grand Cecile, had been in those bleachers when I fell. She'd followed the ambulance in her own car, right behind my mother. She'd sat in that waiting room for 4 hours during my surgery. She'd been the one to bring my mother coffee and sit with her and not say useless things. Just be there. And Grand Cecile, who was 71 years old and had grown up in a small town in Virginia and had very fixed ideas about what family meant and what it required, had noticed that my father never showed up. She didn't say anything to me right away. Grand Cecile was not a person who said things before she was ready. She sat with information, turned it over, decided what she thought about it, and then acted. I didn't find out until 3 weeks later what she had been quietly doing during those 3 weeks. I was home by then, recovering, my shoulder in a sling, watching more television than I'd watched in my entire life combined. My mother had gone back to work. Callum was away at college. Blythe was at school. It was me and the couch and a rotating cast of neighbors and relatives bringing casseroles, which is a thing people do in the South that is both slightly suffocating and genuinely lovely. Grand Cecile came on a Wednesday. She didn't bring a casserole. She brought a folder. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she put the folder down between us. And she said, "I've been talking to someone, a family attorney. I want you to understand what your options are." I looked at the folder. I looked at her. I said, "What do you mean?" She explained it carefully in that measured way of hers. She had spoken with an attorney about the legal specifics of my father's custodial responsibilities, what he was required to do, what he had and hadn't done over the past several years, and what could be pursued if someone chose to pursue it. She had also spoken with the attorney about the possibility of her petitioning for a change in my legal situation. Not removing my father's rights entirely. That was a longer, harder road, but establishing her as a co-guardian, a formal legal presence in my life that meant someone was always accountable for me. I sat there for a long time without saying anything. Grand Cecile said, "I'm not asking you to be angry at your father. That's your choice. I'm asking you to let someone who shows up be the one the paperwork says is responsible for you." I thought about the hospital room, the clock, 9:47. He heard I had a rough day. I said, "Okay." What came next was not quick or simple. My father had to be notified. He had to have the opportunity to respond. There were meetings with the attorney and a court date and documents in a process that is very unsexy compared to how it gets described, which is just a lot of sitting in waiting rooms and signing things. My father contested it. I want you to know that. He didn't just let it go. He hired his own attorney, and he contested it, and he called me twice during that period. And both times he said things like he felt blindsided and he had no idea I felt this way. And he'd always been there for me in the ways that mattered. The ways that mattered. I didn't argue with him. I let the process happen. At some point, his attorney must have told him the documentation was not favorable to his case because he stopped contesting about 6 weeks in. The record of his attendance or absence over the previous 3 years was not something that could be explained away. 2 games in 3 years. The hospital. The calls that came late or not at all. The court granted Grand Cecile shared guardianship. The day after the paperwork was finalized, she took me to lunch at this diner she'd been going to for 40 years, the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that comes in a ceramic mug and pie in a rotating glass case. She ordered pie for both of us without asking me what I wanted, which she had done my entire life and which I had always found both annoying and deeply comforting. She said, "I want you to know that I'm not replacing anything. Your father is still your father." I said, "I know." She said, "And I'm not doing this because I'm angry at him, though I am." That surprised me. Grand Cecile didn't often say things like that directly. She said, "I'm doing this because when you were lying on that floor, the person who should have come didn't, and you still looked for him. And I saw your face when you realized he wasn't there. And no 17-year-old should have to look for someone who isn't there." I looked at my pie for a while. I said, "He called at 9:47. She said, "I know. She'd heard from my mother." Rough day. We sat there in the vinyl booth, and she let me cry in a way I hadn't yet let myself cry since October. The kind that starts slow and then gets bigger than you expected. And she put her hand on mine and didn't try to stop it or fix it or explain it, just held on while it happened. That was 12 years ago. I'm 29 now. I coach volleyball on weekends, youth league, 6 to 10-year-olds, which is chaos in the best way. My shoulder healed. Not perfectly. There are days it aches when it rains, and I had to change the way I serve. But I play in an adult recreational league on Thursday nights, and I'm still good. Still, that kind of good. My relationship with my father is what it is. He came to my college graduation. He sends birthday texts now, every year, on the actual day. Sometimes we have dinner when I'm in his area. It's polite and careful and a little sad, and I've made some kind of peace with that, which is different from being fine. Being fine was something I performed. This peace is something I actually arrived at. Grand Cecile is 83. She still goes to that diner on Sundays. Last spring, I took a weekend trip to visit her, and we ate pie in the vinyl booth, and she told me 3 stories about people from her hometown I'd never heard of and never will again, and I wrote nothing down and remember all of it. The guardianship was never something we talked about much after it happened. It wasn't a dramatic turning point we circled back to in conversation. It just quietly became part of who we were to each other, which is how the real things tend to work. Not a moment, a fact. Here is what I know now that I didn't know at 17. The people who show up in the waiting room are the people who love you. Not the people who call at 9:47 with a reason. Not the people who say they wouldn't miss it and then miss it. The people who are there when your vision is going white at the edges and the paramedic is asking your name and you need someone to just be in the room. I spent a lot of years trying to need less so the people who gave less wouldn't feel inadequate. It's a very exhausting way to live. I don't recommend it. Grand Cecile never asked me to need less. She just kept showing up, decade after decade, pie and ceramic coffee mugs and her hand on mine, steady as anything. I think about that a lot, especially on the days my shoulder aches, especially when it rains. I've thought a lot about why things turned out the way they did. Not in a bitter way, or at least not anymore. More like the way you turn a rock over just to see what's underneath it. You're not angry at the rock. You just want to understand it. My father made choices, small ones mostly. The choice to stay at Diane's son's awards ceremony instead of getting in the car. The The choice to call it 9:47 instead of 9:47 in the morning when he first heard. The choice, over 3 years, to show up to 2 games out of a season's worth and tell himself that counted. None of those choices felt dramatic in the moment, I'm sure. They probably each felt reasonable, justifiable, something he could explain if pressed. But choices accumulate. That's the thing nobody warns you about. They stack up quietly, one on top of another, until the pile is so tall it becomes a wall. And then one day, you're on a gymnasium floor with your collarbone broken, and you look toward the door, and you already know, before you even finish looking, that he isn't coming. That's what accumulated choices do. They write the ending before you even know the story has started. And Grande Cecile, she made choices too. For 71 years before that October, she had been making the choice to show up. For my mother, when she was young. For Callum and Blythe and me when we were small. For every birthday and every bad day. And every unremarkable Tuesday when nothing was happening but she came anyway. She didn't make a grand gesture the day I got hurt. She just did the same thing she'd always done, which was be there. It looked extraordinary only because it stood next to something so ordinary as a father who wasn't. I think about what it took for her to open that folder on my kitchen table. She's not a confrontational woman. She doesn't like conflict or lawyers or anything that makes people uncomfortable. But she sat across from me and she did it anyway, because her understanding of what was right was stronger than her discomfort with what was hard. That's a kind of moral courage that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the dramatic kind, not the movie kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that shows up on a Wednesday afternoon with a folder and steady hands. I learned something about resilience from all of it that took me years to name. Resilience isn't toughness. It's not being fine. I performed being fine for years, and it cost me something real. A kind of softness I had to work hard to get back. Real resilience is letting the right people in while you're still broken. It's trusting Grande Cecile with the 947 story. It's crying in a vinyl booth in a diner over pie you didn't order yourself. It's being witnessed instead of just enduring. That's the thing I'd tell my 17-year-old self if I could. Not to be stronger. To be smarter about who you let hold you while you heal. The people who stay in the waiting room, those are your people. Build your life around them. Let them put their hand on yours. Let it mean something.